And we are with Jesus back in Nazareth. And we are going to read three different passages that all say essentially the same thing. The passage in Luke, which would be the fourth, we're not going to read because it's just one verse about how, or actually two verses about how Jesus grew in wisdom and stature back when he was 12. And then the next page he's 30. The handout we're not going to get to until the end. So that is what we hope to arrive at eventually. So we are going to begin with Jolene reading Matthew chapter 13, verses 54 to 58. And then Teresa's going to read Mark 6, verses 1 through 6. And Laverne will read John 6, verses 41 to 51. Mark 6, 1 to 6. So Matthew 13, 54 to 58. This is really the crux of the lesson. And then the others are point out that this was a reality that was discussed in all the Gospels. And so Matthew 13, 54 to 58.
Coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogue. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? They asked. Isn't this the covenant son? Isn't his mother Mary? What, where did this man get all these things? But Jesus said to them, not do
Okay. So keep your finger there because we're going to revisit that. But Mark 6, 1 to 6, what does that say?
Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son? Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, only in his own town among his relatives and in his own house is a prophet without honor. He could not do anything there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their lack of faith.
So he could do no miracle there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it might be he didn't do it. And maybe it might have been more choice than ability. Yeah. So John 6, 41 to 51. Yeah, so that they will all be taught by God, Jesus says. The religious leaders in John 6 are saying, how can this guy say he's come down from heaven? We know where he's from. We know his family. Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he say he came down from heaven? And then Jesus will say, the prophets say that we will all be taught by God. So how did Jesus get the teaching that he had, that he brought out into the world, if he spent 30 years in Nazareth before he came teaching? We will all be taught by God. And so that's an indication of where this came from. So if you think about Matthew 13 and Mark 6, that's the question people have when Jesus comes to Nazareth and preaches. Where did he get this? He got it from God. Now, you would think that if God was going to send someone to bring the message of God to the world, God would probably send them to Jerusalem, which is where the temple was, where the seat of highest learning in Israel was, where the best teachers were, would have probably had them born into a priestly family, so that they would have had access to everything that Jerusalem and the traditions of the people of Israel had to offer, that would be accessible to them. But Jesus wasn't born into a priestly family that had connections in Jerusalem. He was born into the family of Joseph and Mary, who were known in Nazareth, who were known even to the religious leaders. Once they got a sense that Jesus was up to something, they would say, don't we know his family? So Jesus is born into a family that lives in Nazareth, not a family that is from Judea and Jerusalem. Priestly tradition. Is there someone in the New Testament who is born into the priestly tradition? John the Baptist. John the Baptist is the son of Zechariah, who is a priest and who works in Jerusalem in the temple as a priest. So John the Baptist is born into that family and has at his disposal everything that comes with that. Jesus is born into a completely different context. And by virtue of John being born into the priestly family, it would stand to reason that God can have the Messiah, the Savior of the world, born into whatever family he wants. And if God had wanted the Messiah, the Savior of the world, to be born into a priestly family, to grow up in the traditions of the people of Israel and in the power centers of Jerusalem, with all of that at his disposal, God would have done that. But God didn't do that. Jesus was born into the Mary and Joseph family and lived and grew up in Nazareth. And in Matthew 13 and Mark 6, those are the two places in the New Testament that say this is what Jesus did or what he learned. And it's interesting that Mark 6 says, is this not the carpenter? But what does Matthew 13 say? Is this not the son of the carpenter? So which is right? They're both right. He's the son of the carpenter, and he's also the carpenter, because that's what the son would have done. So the word for carpenter, an important word, Only used twice in the New Testament, in Mark 6 and Matthew 13. And the word is tekton. 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 And in Greek, yeah. And the word means builder, maker, uh, and that can be with wood, like a carpenter. It can be with stone. It isn't really a stone mason, though. It's more of a stone builder. Stone builder. What do you build with stone? Walls. In the ancient world, what do you build with stone? You build temples. What are houses made out of? Walls, stone. So you might build a house with stone. You would use stone to build an altar. You might find a stone that was not hewn, that wasn't cut, and use that as an altar because it's a natural expression of connection with God. But you would use stone, you would shape it and use it in building, both at home and as an occupation. The What do you think how active do you think the building trades were in Nazareth? Do you think Jesus and Joseph opened up a string of Home Depots in Nazareth and cornered the market on the building trades?
No, there wasn't anything there.
Exactly. It's small town. Small town. It's nice to have in the town people who can make things because they would have the tools necessary to make it, and you couldn't go down and rent a tool from someone. It was your livelihood to have the tools to shape the wood and to shape the stone. But you would also need the knowledge of how to do it, especially when working with stone. Exactly. So that it would be something that you learned over time. And if you could make the stone fit together well, it would, if you were building a wall for a house, which is what they would do in the ancient world, that Mary and Joseph have a home in Nazareth. But when Jesus grows up, does he live in the house with mom and dad?
No.
No. What do they do? Does he build his own house? Or does he build his own rooms that are connected to the main house that belong to mom and dad?
Yeah.
So you build your own rooms. And that was true of every family, that you would have the family home, and then the children would have their rooms that were built onto the family home. Now, Jesus' family grows up, and there are several brothers. How many brothers?
4 brothers, and it doesn't count the sisters.
The sisters may live in the family home with mom and dad until they're married, and then they move into. So they may not get their own rooms, but the brothers would definitely get their own rooms and live their own lives. So that you're building rooms onto existing homes in a village. So that's work. So there's work to be done there. Do you think Jesus and Joseph and the family business, they're affluent or middle income or poor? They are poor. It's, there isn't a lot of opportunity to grow the business. Your business is essentially responding to needs when they arise. So as needs arise, then you would respond. Opportunities might come, but it isn't like fishing where Peter, Andrew, James, and John are in the fishing business and you would catch fish because everyone needed to eat. I marvel at this sometimes when I go to the store and I see like chicken in the meat section and meat on the in the refrigerator at the store, and I just pause and think, How much food is necessary to feed the nation and to feed the world? How much food just in a day has to be processed and shared so that people can eat? Grown first, yes, exactly, grown first. And so fishermen could fish and catch whatever fish they got and bring it down to Magdala, which is where Mary Magdalene was from, which was the fish processing center on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And so all the fishing boats would go there. They would dump their catch, they would sell it, it would be processed, and they could get their money. And so you could fish more, catch more fish, make more money, have more boats, catch more fish, make more money. So that there was an opportunity to have a business in the fishing industry on the Sea of Galilee and do all right. And if you go see Peter's home in Capernaum, pretty spacious for the ancient world. You know, Peter was doing all right. Nazareth would have been nowhere.
But, but they probably, building, they probably did, traded. I'll build this room for you if you will do this for me.
They may have done some barter, but it's interesting. If you guys have this map handy from last week, there is a little red dot where Capernaum is, and that's where Jesus will eventually go, but he didn't grow up there. He grew up here in Nazareth, in a little town west of the southern part of the Sea of Galilee. And if you look a little north of Nazareth, there is a town called Sepphoris. And archaeologists have found that Sepphoris was growing during the first century AD. Exactly, that there was building going on in Sepphoris, that it was a Jewish community that the Romans, Sepphoris, it's just north of Nazareth on the way to Cana in Galilee. And so it was on a road that connected the Mediterranean with the city of Tiberias on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So Sepphoris became a Roman uh, interest. And so there was building going on there. So they think that Jesus, in his work, probably went there, and it would have been the biggest town within walking distance, a day trip to go and do work. And he probably went there and did work building and would have seen things there that you wouldn't see in Nazareth. Like there would be theater in Sepphoris because the Romans were building there. And if you are building a Roman theater, you have a lot of hands at work getting it built. And the Romans didn't like to do like what we do now in America is we get an idea and then we put the plans together, and then there's a lot of discussion about whether or not it should be done. Then there's studies about whether it can be done and what the impacts will be. And then there's the processes of going out and putting it out for bid. And by the time you get bids, then you have to retrace your steps back to the planning stage and what impacts there will be. And so nothing gets built. It takes a long time for anything to get built here. In Rome, it wasn't that way. They built the Colosseum in about a year. You think about, they decided we're going to build this, let's get to work, and they built stuff. Exactly. And they had slaves. Yes. So they would have a plan. We want to build this. They bring the people in, get building. And so there was the opportunity for work to be done, but What are some of the lessons you learn when you're a builder from Nazareth? And think about this. Jesus did this work for at least 18 years before he went out and started his public ministry. This is what he did: tecton, builder, craftsman, stone worker. What do you learn doing that?
Learn how to do a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Patience. You learn patience. Okay. You learn collaboration, working together. That's right. Everybody, you don't build the whole cathedral. You build your part of it, and everybody working together. Teamwork. You learn teamwork.
And how to get along with the bosses.
Oh, you learn how to get along with the bosses. Do you think all the bosses were perfectly fair all the time? No, maybe not. So maybe he learned.
They were Romans.
So if the bosses were Romans, do you think the Roman bosses might have cheated some of their workers? Do you think the non-Roman bosses might have cheated some of their workers? So if you're in the ancient world and you're a worker for 18 years, you think of it, this is what Jesus did. This is what he learned. That people aren't fair. That people cheat one another. That you might put in a whole day's work, and at the end of the day, maybe they pay you and maybe they don't. There's a parable waiting to happen. That's right. And if they don't pay you, what recourse do you have? None. You're at the mercy of the people who are in charge. That's what he learned. That the world is unfair and egregiously unfair. So do you quit work? No, you keep working. And you strive to.
You get paid.
That's right. And you strive to bring the best you have. And there's a parable that Jesus, over half of Jesus' parables are about work and money. Over half. If we'd had time last week, we'd have talked about the nature parables, because there are nature parables. Nature helped Jesus understand and express the reality of God. But work helped Jesus understand and express the reality of God. In the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, where everybody gets paid the same for a day's work, but those who came early come back and argue with the landowner, who is generous and gives everybody the same, a day's wage. Everybody gets paid a full day's wage. And those who worked all day come and say, but we bore the burden of the day in the heat. So Jesus would have known about that. The burden and the heat of the day. And you work all the way through it. That's work. And you do that every day but the Sabbath. Or if there were festivals and celebrations.
We have workers in what are all the
unions? Yeah. So now we have labor unions, which are a relatively recent phenomenon in the history of the world. And the experience of people at work, even when bosses aren't kind or honest, and work is really hard, do we learn things of God through work? We do. We do, and Jesus did. God will teach them all. God teaches us. God taught Jesus for 18 years in his tecton work, but he also would have studied the scriptures, which it's like you go to school. You go to school, you go to synagogue, they have the scrolls. Jesus went to the synagogue in Nazareth to preach. He opened the Isaiah scroll. So he would have gone there, they would have opened the Isaiah scroll, and they had a stick, and they would have pointed at the words, and you would have learned to read them, and you would have learned their meanings, and you would have discussed them. And so the things of God are taught in the experience of work, and work can be with stone and wood, and work can be with the Word of God. Those are both the work of God. Now, work gives us life lessons, and Jesus took those life lessons and used them to understand the reality of God and helped us to understand the reality of God through the experience of the work that we do. Now, do you think in America today, they say there's three areas of work. There's nonprofit work, government work, and for-profit work. And percentage-wise, how many people work in each sector?
Not even.
Not nonprofit work, yeah, about 5%, they say. 5 to 7%. Not a lot. And nonprofit work relies on the generosity of donors and supporters. Barbara reminded me on Sunday, and we'll look at this text next week, but women who followed Jesus in his ministry provided for their needs and supported the work of the ministry. So for at least 3 years, Jesus did nonprofit work. So Jesus was nonprofit for 3 years, and other people supported the needs of the ministry. For 18 years, he was for profit. He never worked for the government. So 5 to 7% nonprofit, about 15% work for the government. Yeah, about 15%. And that leaves about 75 to 80% working in small businesses or in for-profit companies. Jesus worked 18 years in a for-profit company, a business, a family business. And you think about what family businesses and small businesses have been through here in the last 3 years because of COVID and the impact that had. And yet your livelihood and your family's well-being relies on being able to work. And so there were a lot of people who went to work, even though they might have been COVID positive, because if you don't work, you don't get paid. I mean, that's a reality. And and that's true today in 2022, and it was true in the ancient world. And so Jesus went to work. Did his brothers stay home and play video games? No, they went to work. And so the family learns this, especially the boys, they learn the trade. And they work in Nazareth, they work in the surrounding areas, and they work in the building of the city of Sepphoris, which would have maybe been a real benefit to the family at that time with Roman building. So long as you get paid for your work, wouldn't be so bad. It would have been like more of a city. It would have had like a downtown. Maybe Palo Alto has a downtown. Yeah, people would have had money. The Romans who moved there would have had money. Yeah, and so it was.
It was a resort town, though.
Not so much. It was more of a. This actually Palo Alto's kind of old money, right? Is Palo Alto old money or new money? I don't know. Oh, it depends on where you live. Okay, yeah. Maybe like Palo Alto because all these tech guys moved there, right? So the tech guys made their money in yeah, kind of like Palo Alto. People who just made money moved there and then people, oh, there. So they could have through their connection with that opportunity. But the place where Jesus learned the things of God wasn't the temple. I think that's the point of Mark 6 and Matthew 13. That his father was the carpenter, the tekton, the builder, and he was the tekton, the builder. That's where he learned the things of God and the life lessons of the kingdom. And over half of all the parables he taught, came out of that experience. So Jesus goes to his home, his hometown, and he opens the scrolls and he teaches. And how do people respond to his teaching?
I don't believe it.
They say, "Who is this guy?"
They don't respond to his teaching, or they don't respond to his faith. I don't know which because I am the fulfillment. And I think that's what they
Yeah.
were.
Yes.
Because here's this kid that they mentioned
Yeah.
coming and saying, I am the fulfillment of God's promise. And they're going, no, not your promise.
So yeah. Yes, they loved Isaiah and they loved the words of Isaiah that Jesus read, and they would have expected him to say, Isaiah was a powerful prophet, and these are the promises that God made through Isaiah, and we await their fulfillment. I am the fulfillment of these promises. They did take issue with that. And it's interesting that in Jesus' initial teaching in Matthew's gospel, he sums everything up, the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7. He sums those teachings up with a parable or a teaching that connects this teaching moment in his public ministry with where he came from and what he learned at work. And so we're going to read that. Carol, you were out with your turn to read. So if you would read Matthew 7, 24 to 27. 24 to 27.
Yes.
So this is the last teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. So this is the summation of everything that begins with the Beatitudes and the teachings on forgiveness and on taking the log out of your own eye instead of in the speck that's in your brother's eye. You know, and being a carpenter, Jesus would have worked with logs and shaped them and cut them and had sawdust flying all over. And so when he said the log in your eye as opposed to the speck of sawdust that's in your brother's eye, he would have known what he was talking about. And he would have been able to express that discrepancy through his own experience. And so this is the summation story out of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7.
Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose up, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it crashed.
So what's that a story of? Building a house. And what is the most important part of building a house? And how would Jesus know that? Because he did it. And when you read this summation of the Sermon on the Mount about people who are building a house, you can imagine Jesus as a 14-year-old with whatever they use for shovels in the ancient world, digging. And Joseph there watching him, because Joseph would have been smart enough to make the kid dig. Don't dig, you got a kid, make him dig. So Jesus is digging the foundation of what's probably going to be his rooms. And he would say, okay, is this deep enough? And Joseph would say, what? Have you hit rock yet? And if you haven't hit rock yet, keep digging. And is this deep enough? Have you hit rock yet? And if you haven't, you keep digging. Jesus learned this through 18 years of life lessons with his dad in Nazareth being a builder. And he says, this is what life with God is like. I mean, you think about that. Had he grown up in the ivory tower in Jerusalem, other people would have been digging. Other people would have been putting in the foundations and putting up the walls. Other people would have had to deal with unjust bosses and dishonest co-workers. But Jesus grew up in Nazareth, in the middle of nowhere, and he lived through all of those experiences in his work. The 90% of his life, and then the 10% of his life, which was his public ministry, he took that experience and he used it to express the reality of God, speaking to people who also would have known that experience. Were most of the Jews in ancient Israel and Judea well off or poor? Poor. They were poor. And who was well off?
Romans.
The Romans were well off. The Jerusalem elite were well off. And the Jericho elite were well off. So if you were like Zacchaeus, who lives in Jericho, he's doing fine. Some of the priests who had homes in Jericho because they couldn't quite afford to live in Jerusalem, you're just down the hill. Jericho and Jerusalem were the two urban hubs down in Judea. And if you lived there, other people would have done the work. Jesus did the work and learned the lesson from the work, the lesson of God. And so the foundation is fundamental. When you're a builder, it's all about the foundation. Barbara.
So, and then God, Jesus, early on, and relates to him as the foundation. He becomes the foundation of the church. But like building, and then you have to reach the foundation, and that's what when Peter nice is that, but Jesus retries again in his rock and not just sand,
That's right.
so that he can move forward and build the church.
So, yeah, that's a really good point. Peter is the rock. He is the foundation. But then the earthquake comes.
Yeah.
And the earthquake comes and it shakes the earth. And that rock, moves. It gets put out of place. And Jesus returns it to its place so that he can build on it with the experience of Simon, son of John, do you love me? So, yes, Peter is the rock. The foundation is on the rock. And be built up into a spiritual house, Peter will write in his letter. Be living stones that are built into a spiritual house. That all comes out of the experience of Jesus in Nazareth. So, 90% is that. 10% is the ministry that he lived out. And we're going to take a look at that. Actually, before we look at that, we're going to look at another house story. Because Jesus at the end of Matthew 7 says, build your house on the rock. Build your house on the rock. When the storm comes, it will stand.
Pastor Mark,
Yes.
I'm just looking.
door. That's right. A door. I bet his doors, when the buildings he put up closed nice and snug. Because, the elements would come in. If the stone needed to fit together, you would fill the cracks with straw probably and mud. But the tighter the stones fit together, the better your house was, the cooler it would be, and the better it was able to keep heat inside when it was cold. And so if you had a good builder who could make those stones fit nice and tight, that was good stuff. And so Jesus is all about building and building right and building your house on a rock and having a solid foundation. And we're going to Barbara, who is going to read Luke chapter 13, verses 31 to 33, before we look at Jesus' public ministry. So Luke 13, 31 to 33.
Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "So shall that prosper me. Listen, I'm casting out demons and performing here today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem."
Keep going.
Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathering her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, but I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord."
Behold, your house is forsaken, or your house is desolate. The house that they built is empty. That their house will not stand. And Jesus will later say, this destroy this temple in 3 days, I will raise it up. That the house that Jerusalem built is on what kind of foundation? That's right. It is coming down. That house is coming down. Because the only foundation that we can build the house of our lives on is what? God. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That the one who builds their house on the rock that is God, the rock that is the Lord who is with us, that house will stand. But if you build it on tradition and corruption and vying for power, behold, your house is desolate. In verse, I can't even read these numbers. 35. What did I say? To 33? I meant to the end. How many verses in that? 35. Okay. We read to 35. I can't even read my own writing. So you don't have the word house there? Your house is left to you. No, your house is desolate or yeah, well, it's, yeah. So the word for building your house on the foundation of the rock, and the word for your house is forsaken or desolate, same word. Actually, I used to think IKEA came from this word because it's the Greek word oikos or oikia, Oikia, house. And so I thought, oh, a Scandinavian guy used a Greek word for this company that makes things for the house, oikia, except he called it IKEA. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's like the first letters of his kids' names or something. And so that's where it came from. But, I thought he was onto something, but no such luck. So Jesus points out that there are different ways to build the house of our lives and our faith lives. And the foundation matters. And one house will stand and one house will fall. And so Matthew talks about the work that Jesus did to build the house of faith in the lives of the people of God. And that's different than working with stones and wood. He's now working with human beings. And the work that he does is a little bit different. And so we are at Lori. Lori's going to read Matthew 4, verses 12 to 25. Matthew 4. Let me double check that. Make sure I'm reading what I wrote correctly. Yes, this is the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. And then Jerry is going to read Matthew 9, 35 to 38, where it is a recapitulation reminding us that this is the work that Jesus is doing in his public ministry. So this is about the work that Jesus takes up now. For 12 to 25.
Nazareth, by the lake in the area of
Zebulun and Naphtali.
what was said to the prophet Isaiah.
Zebulun, Naphtali.
That come on, Jesus began to preach the kingdom of heaven. Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out. I want to enough for enough to follow him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in the boat with the father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. He spread all over Syria, and people brought him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demons possessed, and seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds in Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him.
Okay. So Jesus begins his public ministry. We're going to get to the land of Zebulun and Naphtali in a minute. But in verse 23, it says the work that he did in his public ministry. And it says that he did three things. What are the three things that Jesus did in his public ministry? He taught. Jesus went throughout Galilee teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news or preaching the good news, and healing every disease and sickness. Those are the three things that Jesus does in his public ministry. Teaches, proclaims the kingdom of God, and heals. That's his ministry, and he does that for 3 years. It's interesting that the preaching and teaching and healing are about restoring things that have been broken. The land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of the shadow of death, on them light has come. darkness and the shadow of death. That is a hard experience. And the scriptures say that Galilee of the Gentiles, Galilee north of Judea, away from Jerusalem and Jericho, there was pain and struggling and darkness in the lives of the people. That it was a hard place to live. Why would it have been a hard place to live?
Well, it's out in the desert to start with. It was out in the desert to start
Well,
with.
actually, it wasn't so much in the desert. It was in kind of a green area. So there were little towns and villages. But did you have control over your own lives? No. There were so many people who had control over your life. You were not free to live your own life. That there were Roman taxes and temple taxes and Jerusalem taxes and all kinds of things, burdens placed upon you. And so that was part of the oppression that people lived under. And you were also subject to the demands of Rome. And if Rome came through and decided to make an example of some Galileans for misbehaving, they might wipe out a whole city. So the countryside had been in exile and under the imposition of foreign governments. So Galilee is where Jesus does preaching, teaching, and healing. And so it's interesting that God brings the Savior of the world, sends him to a little town so he can learn how to work with stone and wood, and uses that as his school where he could learn the things of God. And then sends him teaching, preaching, and healing, and sends him into the towns and villages of Galilee. Exactly. He left Nazareth. That 18 years of his work in Nazareth, that's gone now. And he begins his public ministry. 3 years, and he lives in Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee. And it gives him access to a lot of people, and a lot of people who are hungry for hope, because they, for generations, have lived under the weight of Rome and whoever happens to be in charge in Jerusalem. And Jesus comes preaching the kingdom, teaching them the things of God, about how you are free to build the home of your spiritual life, that you are free to do that, and Rome and Jerusalem can't keep you from doing that. And he heals the wounded and the broken people who have been you think about this. We've lived with COVID for 2 years. And you think about the sociological impact that that has had, and the emotional impact and the mental health impact that that has had on families and children. And you think about living under the weight of occupying forces that keep you under control for generations. Think about living the COVID life for generations and having to be controlled the way we've had to be controlled, and how that impacts your well-being. So people are living in what some people have referred to as tolerable misery. It doesn't kill you, but you're miserable every day. And somehow you just press on. Exactly.
Those who are hungry in an area that's like now, there's a lot of hunger. You see that around in the world. In that area, a lot of hungry people that we don't even know they're hungry, but they're hungry. and so hungry.
Yes, exactly. Hungry for spiritual food. And it's interesting that he didn't go, when he leaves Nazareth, he doesn't go right to Jerusalem. He goes to Capernaum and preaches in Galilee. And Matthew says the people came from Jerusalem and Jericho from the south, and from the north it came from Tyre and Sidon on the Mediterranean. And they came to Galilee because it's kind of in the middle. But it's also a bunch of small towns, a number of small towns spread out through Galilee. If you go to the south, if you go to Judea, it's mostly desert with a couple of cities, Jerusalem and Jericho. And Jesus didn't go to the cities preaching and teaching and healing at first. For 2.5 years, he's up in Galilee in the small towns and the villages, preaching and teaching and healing, because it's where people are hungry, but it's also where people could travel a short distance to gather together as a group. So you didn't have to make that 100-mile walk to go see Jesus in Jerusalem. You could just walk up the road or take a boat across the lake, and Jesus is there teaching. So he made himself accessible. People in the South who had money, they could pay to make the trip up to the North. But people in the North who didn't have money, all they had to do was walk for a couple hours and be where Jesus was at the lake and experience what he came to bring. And people would bring the sick with them. And, you think about the unintended consequences of carrying the sick to be with Jesus. So you leave your home, you bundle up whoever it is who's sick, and you care for them and worry about them and strive to meet their needs until you get them to Jesus. And then on the way home, you share the story and the exhilaration and exuberance of having been healed by Jesus. And what that experience does is it brings people together. The caring for someone brings you closer, and the celebrating the healing brings you closer. And so the healing event is part of a bigger picture of Jesus bringing people together through preaching and teaching and healing. And that's the work that he does for 3 years or 2.5 years before he makes a right and heads to Jerusalem, and he becomes the source of teaching, healing, and proclamation, that he embodies it. It is no longer words, it's him. And if you had nothing but time, you would study that Jesus journeyed to Jerusalem, where he tells the disciples over and over and over again, I'm going to Jerusalem. I am going to be handed over to sinners. I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be condemned. I'm going to die on the cross and on the third day be raised up. It is my story that unfolds in Jerusalem. But before we get to Jerusalem, Jesus takes this preaching, teaching, and healing ministry and the lessons he learned in Jerusalem or in Nazareth growing up, and uses it to help instruct the people of God. This is how we live the life of faith. And he did that in parables. And I gave you copies of 3 parables now that Jesus has spent time helping people hear and understand and experience the reality of God. He teaches, and these are 3 examples of parables that Jesus shares. The first one we know is the Good Samaritan. And this lesson is, okay, knowing what we know, having grown up in Nazareth and worked with stone and wood, been in business for ourselves, now we're teaching and healing and preaching the good news of the kingdom. This is what we should do. Knowing what we know now, having learned what we have learned, this is what we should do. And Mona, we're with you. If you would read Luke 10:25-29, and Angela, if you would read 30-37, this is what we should do.
On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. He said, "What is written in the law?" How do you read it? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your mind. Your neighbor. You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said,
Oh, yeah. There we go.
A man was going to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, leaving him half the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed out on the other side. So on the other side, with a man, he went to him and bound his legs, and donkey, brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said. Everything was in the hands of the robbers.
Okay. This is an example of Jesus using what we learn from a book. This is the teacher Jesus, which is the first in the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the teaching. But yeah, Laverne. Yeah, it's using your means to care for others. Jesus came preaching and teaching and healing, and now there's a world in need. And this is what we learn from the book, but this is what we learn from real life, from work. And what happens is the Samaritan became a healer. A Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. He took pity on him or had compassion, went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Well, Jesus was a healer. And now he's teaching, when someone's hurt, step out and heal them and use the means that you have acquired from your work, from your life, as a way to continue the work of healing. And left him and said, and dropped him off. That's right. And so there's this sense of the mercy of God is something that we share with one another as we participate in the healing ministry of Jesus. But, and think about this. Jesus worked, made money, had income, paid the bills, paid the taxes. He knows how important money is. And he says, the man took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper to take care of him while he's away, and then said, when I come back, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. So I am going to put my means to work to bring about the mercy of God or to bring about the healing of broken people. And so that's what we should do, given the teaching, healing, preaching ministry of Jesus and the experience he had working and earning money and realizing the power of money to do good. Money can do good. It can work to bring healing.
There's also a certain it's so easy to do it many times. But I don't know about
Exactly.
the idea of not everybody is so primary reaction.
Yeah.
And whatever you said, I don't think
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you're lying or not.
And so that the innkeeper and the Samaritan are working in a relationship of trust
Right.
to care for this person who has been hurt and wounded and needs healing. That's what we should do. That's the lesson. But if we just turn the page and go a couple chapters in Luke's gospel down to chapter 12 verses 16 to 21, this is what we tend to do, or what some people tend to do. And I think we are at Cecilia. If you would read verses 16 to 19, and Jeanne read verses 20 and 21.
And he told them, I will tear down my barn and build a bigger one, and there I will store my surplus of grain. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. People are busy, eat, drink, and be merry. How it will be with whoever stores up grain for themselves.
That's what people tend to do, is they use their work to care for themselves and those close to them. And I'm sure Jesus would have experienced that. Do you think Jesus was generous when over those 18 years he's working in Nazareth and going to work and trying to save money, and somewhere along the line Joseph dies, so Jesus is responsible for the household? You think he was generous? Yeah. And he had experiences and family stories about people who weren't generous to him. For example, when he was born, no room here, but you can go out into the stable. And that, growing up in a family that is looked down on, at least by your own relatives, and not having the means to make the real sacrifice in the temple, you're poor, so you sacrifice pigeons because that's all you can afford. But you're there and you make the sacrifice, so that it isn't the what is sacrificed, but it's the heart offered in the sacrifice. And it's the same way with the Good Samaritan, the heart that's offered in the caring. And the rich fool has prepared this for himself, but the widow's mite is the other opposite example of giving what you have. Yeah, the story of Zacchaeus, who returns anything that he's taken from people, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Half of the parables that Jesus uses in his teaching are parables about what we do with what we have and how we live in the world of work. We work, and work nourishes us. It gives us meaning. Sometimes it gives us fulfillment. I mean, Jerry, you just retired. Do you miss it? You just retired not long ago. Do you miss it? You don't miss going to work? Okay. And so, work is an opportunity to learn and to grow and to open ourselves up to the things of God.
Pastor Mark,
Yes.
you know, this Bible study on the humanity of Jesus, especially today, that Jesus is God's Son, but Jesus, our human mother and father, and what we are studying today, I mean, we learned that from his parents, from his father.
That's right. Just like you learned all these plumbing skills that you have from your dad. And that's a real rich resource that maybe now we Google. If you want to learn how to do something, you go to YouTube and you pull out a video. But I remember the days when the neighbors knew how to do stuff that we didn't know how to do. They'd come over. Okay, I'll do it, but you have to watch, and you'd have to watch and learn. And it was this experience of, in Minnesota, when you grow up, you learn how to jump a car in the winter, and you got the jumper cables. And before you do it, you got to watch somebody do it. And I'll say, this to this to this, hook it up, start the engine. Yeah, Jerry. Exactly, to complete the project, which is exactly what Jesus says in Luke 13. Go tell Herod that on the third day I complete my work. I'm going to finish this job, and that's a builder's mindset. I have started this and I'm going to bring it to completion. And he does bring it to completion in Jerusalem. So we have what we should do, what we often do, and the last parable is Jesus' hope that maybe this is what we might do. And it's having been entrusted with all that we've been entrusted with in our lives, we get this story. And we are with Sue. And Sue, if you would read Matthew 25, 14 to 23. Oh, why don't you read 14 to 19, and Lee read 20 to 23, and Sally can read 24 to the end, and that way everybody's read. 14 to 19.
We are but a man who is going on a journey, calling his servants and entrusted his possessions to them. He gave 5 talents to another 2, and to the third 1, according to his ability. Then he went away immediately, and likewise the one who received 2 gave another 2. The one who received 1 went off and dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants the one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing the additional 5. He said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more. His master said to him, well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you greater responsibilities. Come share your master's joy. Then the one who had received 2 talents also came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more. His master said to him, well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you are faithful in small matters, responsibilities, come share your master's joy. Then the one who had received the 1 talent came forward and said,
Master, I knew you were a demanding person, harvesting where you did not plant and gathering where you did not scatter. So out of fear, I went off and buried your talents in the ground. Here it is back. His master said to him in reply, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvested where I did not plant and gathered where I did not scatter? Should you not then have put my money in the bank so that I could have got it back with interest on my return? Now then, take the talent from now then, take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." I thought the guy that only had one had a lot of guts,
Yeah.
at least.
You wicked, lazy servant. Have you ever worked with someone who didn't work?
Oh, yeah.
That's tough. It's tough to spend all day working alongside someone who doesn't work.
And you have to do their work too, so they don't get that.
Ah, yeah, the work has to get done. And when I was in seminary, I worked at Haagen-Dazs ice cream in Princeton, and it was a happy place. Everybody came happy. And the owner would come in sometimes and he'd look around and he'd stand at the door and yell, "If you can lean, you can clean." And then he'd walk out, you know. So obviously he may have seen some of the workers leaning on the counter and awaken them to the fact that they could continue to put their talents to work for the owner. But yeah, Angela. Well, actually, in the ancient world, a talent was money. It was a unit of money. Some translations use bags of gold because a talent was a lot of money or riches. And it's interpreted in the tradition as financial resources or gifts and qualities, abilities that you have that you can put to work. So really the thing that Jesus hopes for, because these are the nearing the end of his teaching, is that we work by putting our talents to work for the king. That's how Jesus wants us to understand our working in the kingdom. And that's whatever work we do, put our talents to work for the king, so that when I'm scooping ice cream in Haagen-Dazs, I'm not working for the guy who yells through the door. I am there serving a greater purpose. That whatever work I do is for a greater purpose. I'm working to bring joy and happiness to the people who come. I'm working to work together with the people that I'm on the shift with. I'm working to put up with a guy who played the same cassette tape every night when we had to mop the floor. Every night. And it was terrible. I wish, oh, now it's going to be like an earworm in my head the rest of the day. But every night when I worked with him, the same tape. Um, so it was, and the joy of that as well, working together with other people. But you put your gifts and talents to work for the king, and that serves the needs of the world and brings joy. And that, and the last parable, the last of Jesus' teachings, we're not going to read, but what is it? Which is the one that follows at the end of this parable? I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me. So Jesus then brings it into very specific focus. So generally, this is his hope, that we will put our talents to work for the king. And that is how we work in the kingdom. Whatever we do it for the greater purpose. And then he will bring the focus into perfect clarity. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. And so it becomes very human. Laverne. Yeah, it just says, you have been faithful in little or in a few things, and I will now put you over much or over great things. Yes, exactly. You've shown yourself to be faithful. And basically, that means that as we serve, we are called to take bigger steps and maybe greater risks, that the two-talent person gets some more and now they have to put at risk what they've gained. And so it's a continual growth of experience and living the work of the kingdom in the world. But it all ties back to what Jesus learned in 18 years in Nazareth. Amen. Amen. That's right. And human beings, so the prophets say, have heads as dense as wood and hearts as hard as stone. And so, yeah, he worked in the right place. The stones themselves would cry out when he entered Jerusalem. So next week we are with our friends. We've been to work. Oh man, it's a lot of work to go to work. Next week we are with our friends, and we are gathering the friends together in Mark 3, verses 13 to 19. In Luke 6, verses 12 to 16, that's essentially the same story, the calling of the 12. And they get named, which is very important. When you have friends, it's always good to know their names. And people will say, I'm terrible at names, and that's okay. You can say, remind me of your first name again. That's okay. There's no shame in that. But as friends, we know one another's names. It's really bad when someone comes up to you in Safeway and they have a mask on and they're talking to you like a long lost friend, and you are trying to think, I know this person, and you keep them talking, and then when it all comes together and you know who it is. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Yeah, I know. So names, and in Luke 8, 1 to 3, because Jesus' friends were women as well, and we get their names, those who supported the ministry. We will read Matthew 10, 1 to 23, about Jesus' experience of relationship with these friends, sending them out to do this work, and what happens when they come back. It's always good to rejoice together with your friends. John 11, 1 to 16. Sometimes your friends call you out. Sometimes your friends tell you something that is risky for them to tell you. And that's Jesus and Thomas when their friend Lazarus has died. And there's this discussion, and Thomas and the other disciples talk with Jesus about what's going on here and why are we doing it this way? Because they don't understand. And if you have a real relationship with someone, that's what you do. And then we're going to journey with that group into John 15, 1 to 17, which is, I am the vine, you are the branches. And Jesus will look at this group of people that just called him out a little while ago and say, I no longer call you servants, now I call you friends, because we understand why we're here and what we're doing. They didn't understand, they were upset. Now we're here, we understand, and we're friends. And then we will go into the hard part, which is in Jerusalem with Jesus and his disciples. And we will look at Matthew 26, 6 to 35, which is Judas, and Luke 22, 54 to 62, which is Peter. And what happened when your friends let you down. Luke 22, 54 to 62. And it's interesting, everybody talks about Peter denying Jesus, But what Luke does is he makes the point of saying, at that moment, Jesus looked in Peter's eyes. And it's, that's relationship. And it, so we're going to cover gathering the friends, working with the friends, being challenged through your relationship with the friends, and then how the fabric of friendship can be torn and how it is drawn back together. So yes, we're down to friends. We've done nature and work, and now we're friends. Friends who have your back, friends who break your heart. And in the end, you're still friends.